Nearly 4 months after the sinking of SS Marine Electric shook the maritime world, Air Canada Flight 797 was carrying musician Stan Rogers, a man determined to pen a song about the ship's untimely demise. Tragically, before this song could be written, this flight would crash, and just like SS Marine Electric's sinking sent shockwaves through the maritime community that changed numerous regulations, this air crash would do the same. The way these two disasters are intrinsically linked is utterly fascinating. The aircraft involved in today's crash was a McDonnell Douglas DC-932, serial number 47196, and originally registered as Charlie Foxtrot Tango Lima uniform. It was manufactured on March 22, 1968, and was delivered to Air Canada on April 7th that year. By the time of the crash, it had logged 36,825 airframe hours and 34,987 takeoff and landing cycles. One thing we need to note is that this particular DC-9 had experienced a number of problems over the months leading up to the disaster. 76 maintenance reports had been filed in the plane's logs in the previous year, including with circuit breakers, which is important to keep in mind for later. On September 17, 1979, the plane, then serving from Boston, Massachusetts to Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, had suffered an explosive decompression in the rear bulkhead that required rebuilding the tail section and replacing or splicing most of the wiring and hydraulic lines in the back of the plane. Cameron later noted that the Air Canada maintenance crew, quote, did a heck of a job getting everything put back together after the decompression incident. Investigators were unable to find signs of arcing in any of the wire splices from the repair done 4 years earlier, though much of the wiring in the rear of the plane was severely damaged or destroyed by the fire itself. Keep all of this in mind for later. In charge of Flight 797 was Captain Donald Cameron, 51, who had been with Air Canada since March of 1966 and had qualified as a DC-9 captain 9 years prior in November of 1974. At the time of the accident, Cameron had approximately 13,000 flight hours, of which 4,939 were in the DC-9. Beside him was First Officer Claude Woime, 34, who'd flown for Air Canada for 10 years since November of 1973. He had about 5,650 hours of flight experience, including 2,499 hours in the DC-9, and had qualified as a DC-9 First Officer in February of 1979. At 4:25 p.m. Central Time on June 2, 1983, Flight 797 took off from Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The flight was a regularly scheduled passenger flight operated by Air Canada using the plane we discussed earlier, and it was scheduled to make a stop at Toronto International Airport before heading to its final destination, Montreal's Dorval Airport. If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know down in the comments section. While the flight was over Louisville, Kentucky, a fire started in or around the rear lavatory of the aircraft. For those not familiar with the term or are younger listeners, a lavatory is a bathroom. The pilots heard a popping sound around 6:51 Eastern Time during dinner service and discovered that the lavatory circuit breakers had tripped. Captain Cameron's initial attempt to reset the circuit breakers was unsuccessful. According to the flight crew and other Air Canada flight personnel, it was not uncommon for a plane's lavatory circuits to pop occasionally. At about 7 p.m., a passenger seated in the last row informed Flight Attendant Judy Davidson of a strange odor in the rear of the airplane. Davidson traced the odor to the aft lavatory, and she attempted to check on the lavatory by opening the door a few inches. At that time, she observed the lavatory full of light gray smoke, but did not see flames. She asked fellow flight attendant Laura Kayama to find Chief Flight Attendant Sergio Benetti, who entered the lavatory to investigate. Benetti saw no flames, but did see curls of thick black smoke coming out from the seams around the walls of the lavatory. While Benetti sprayed the interior of the lavatory with a CO2 fire extinguisher, Kayama moved passengers on the sparsely populated flight forward and opened air vents to let more fresh air into the cabin. Ayama also went to the cockpit at 7:02 p.m., informed the flight crew of a, quote, fire in the washroom. Captain Cameron put on his oxygen mask and ordered First Officer Woime to go back and investigate. Woime found that the Thick, black smoke was filling the last 3 to 4 rows of seats, and he could not reach the aft lavatory. Benetti informed Ouimet that he did not see the source of the fire, but he had doused the lavatory with fire retardant, and Benetti told Ouimet that he did not believe the fire was in the trash bin. At 7:04, Ouimet returned to the cockpit, told Cameron about the smoke, and suggested descending. However, Ouimet did not report Benetti's comment that the fire was not a mere trash bin fire. A few seconds later, Benetti came to the cockpit and told the captain that passengers were moved forward and that the smoke was easing up. Cameron sent Ouimet back to try inspecting the aft lavatory again. At 7:06, while Ouimet was out of the cockpit, Benetti again told Cameron that he thought the smoke was clearing. The captain, still believing the fire was in the lavatory trash bin, had not started to descend because he expected the fire would be extinguished. Shortly thereafter, the master caution light lit up in the cockpit, indicating a loss of main bus electrical power. The captain called the ATC in Indianapolis, Indiana, and notified them that Flight 797 had an electrical problem. Flight 797's transponder signal then vanished from ATC radar displays, and they were able to monitor the flight by switching to primary radar tracking. At 7:07 p.m., Ouimet reached the aft lavatory again. He reached to open the door, but because it felt hot to the touch, he decided to leave it closed. Ouimet directed the flight attendants to keep the lavatory door closed, then returned to the cockpit where he told Captain Cameron, quote, "I don't like what's happening. I think we better go down, okay?" Cameron detected the urgency in Ouimet's voice, which he took to mean an immediate descent was necessary. Just as Ouimet returned to his seat, the cockpit master warning light lit up, warning the pilots of a loss of emergency electrical power. Cameron ordered Ouimet to switch to battery power, but the loss of main and emergency electrical power caused some electrical systems to fail, including power for the horizontal stabilizer. This caused the stabilizer to be stuck in the cruising position. This made controlling the plane's descent extremely difficult and required great physical exertion from the pilot and first officer. In addition, both flight recorders stopped recording at this point. At 7:08 p.m., Captain Cameron began an emergency descent and declared Mayday, Mayday, Mayday to Indianapolis ATC. Controllers granted Flight 797 clearance to descend for an emergency landing at Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky International Airport in Boone County, Kentucky, near Cincinnati, Ohio. Due to the loss of electrical power's impairment of some flight instruments, controllers had to direct Flight 797 to the airport using a no-gyro approach, with the controller observing Flight 797 on radar and directing the flight to make turns based upon radar position and heading. Smoke filled the passenger cabin and entered the cockpit as the plane descended. The PA system also failed, leaving the flight attendants unable to communicate effectively with the passengers. Nevertheless, attendants were able to move all passengers forward of row 13, and to instruct passengers sitting in exit rows on how to open the doors, a practice that was not standard on commercial airline flights in 1983. If you like history and disasters, make sure to check out my other channel, Shipwreck Sunday. At 7:20 p.m., Captain Cameron and First Officer Ouimet executed an extremely difficult landing at Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky International Airport. 4 tires blew out during the landing. Once the plane came to a stop, Chief Flight Attendant Sergio Benetti opened the front door of the aircraft, through which he escaped. The pilots quickly shut down the airplane. The overwing and forward aircraft doors were opened, and slides at the front doors were deployed. The 3 flight attendants and 18 of the passengers evacuated using these exits. Opening the doors also caused an influx of air which fed the fire. The pilots could not enter the passenger cabin because of the smoke and heat. Ouimet escaped through the right emergency window shortly after the plane landed, but Cameron, who was exhausted from trying to keep the plane under control, was unable to move and barely conscious. Firefighters doused him in firefighting foam through the right window, shocking him awake. He was then able to open the left emergency escape window and drop to the ground, where Ouimet dragged him to safety. Cameron was the last person to escape the plane. Less than 90 seconds after touchdown, the interior of the plane lit up like a tinderbox, killing the remaining 23 passengers on board, who died from smoke inhalation and burns from the fire. 21 of which were Canadians and 2 of which were Americans, and 1 was musician Stan Rogers. Of the 18 surviving passengers, 3 received serious injuries, 13 received minor injuries, and 2 were uninjured. None of the 5 crew members were injured. Survivor Diane Fadley remarked, quote, "It was almost like anybody who got out had nothing wrong. You made it and you were completely fine, or you didn't make it." The fire completely destroyed the plane. Rest in peace to the 23 victims of Air Canada Flight 797, and may they rest easy. Many of the victims' bodies were burned beyond recognition. Almost all of the victims were in the forward half of the aircraft between the wings and the cockpit. Some victims were found in the aisle, while others were still in their seats. 2 victims were found in the rear of the plane, even though all passengers had been moved forward after the fire had been detected. These 2 victims were likely disoriented in the confusion that ensued upon landing and evacuation. Blood samples from the bodies revealed high levels of cyanide, fluoride, and carbon monoxide, chemicals produced by the burning airplane. After investigating, the NTSB was ultimately unable to find the origin of the fire. In August of 1984, the NTSB issued a final report that, while praising the captain for, quote, "exhibiting outstanding airmanship, without which the airplane and everyone on board would certainly have perished," concluded the probable causes were a fire of undetermined origin, the flight crew's underestimation of the fire's severity, and conflicting fire progress information given to the captain. This report also found that the flight crew's delayed decision to institute an emergency descent contributed to the severity of the accident. Following the crash, the NTSB issued several safety recommendations to the FAA, including require smoke detectors in lavatories, require the installation of automatic fire extinguishers adjacent to and in lavatory waste receptacles, require all US-based air carriers install in-cabin fire safety enhancements, including but not limited to fire-blocking seat materials to limit both the spread of the fire and the generation of toxic chemicals through ignition, emergency track lighting at or near the floor strong enough to cut through heavy fuel fire smoke, raised markings on overhead bins indicating the location of exit rows to aid passengers in locating these rows in case of passenger visual impairment, and handheld fire extinguishers using advanced technology extinguishing agents such as halon. The loss of this aircraft, with singer Stan Rogers, and the loss of SS Marine Electric both resulted in severe but necessary changes to both aviation and shipping regulations. Things that we sit and think, no duh, but would have never been implemented if it wasn't for these 2 tragedies. Rest in peace to the victims of Air Canada Flight 797.